Good morning, everyone. I recognise quite a few faces in the room from an event that Nigel and I spoke at last term, so we're becoming a bit of a dynamic duo that seems to pop up everywhere. So our presentation this morning has three different parts. It has the first part, which is just a quick reminder about some of the inspection principles. The main bulk is about what we've found so far, 20 inspections on, and also just to take you through a written statement of action. What does that mean going forwards? We will allow you obviously to have the slides, access to the slides. I'm conscious they're a little bit dense. It's because the information we have on some of the slides we're using with our board members at the moment. So please bear with Nigel and I as we pick out some of those headlines for you. Obviously, in terms of background, you'll know that this was a commission from the Minister to both Ofsted and CQC to work jointly together. And that's really important. And as I go through the presentation, I want to just highlight how we work together. And that's a real underpinning of the framework. Because we're inspecting 152 local areas within a 5-year window, it's really important that everyone recognises this is not a cycle of inspections, both for Nigel at CQC and us at Ofsted. Often we go through a cycle, then we restart the cycle. That wasn't the commission, so we'll inspect everyone once within that 5-year window. And obviously, I'm sure you're familiar now with our teams led by one of Her Majesty's inspectors from Ofsted, a CQC inspector, and also an Ofsted inspector. And we're aware, as some of you have received those inspections that are sitting in the room with us today, clearly sometimes we have to take cognizance of the size of the local area. You might have 1 or 2 CQC inspectors on the team. And I often get questions about the recruitment of Ofsted inspectors for these particular inspections. We recruited last year during the spring and summer, and we are obviously always building capacity in the regions at Ofsted, so clearly looking ahead to what resource we need. Please, if you're interested, do keep your eye on the Ofsted website if you fancy joining us and becoming an Ofsted inspector for these inspections. So where are we now? We obviously consulted, published the framework and the handbook, and obviously May last year was a pivotal moment when we began these inspections, and we've now completed 20 inspections. And as Stuart said this morning, 16 of those reports are now published. And the reason 16 are published is we have a 3-stage quality assurance process. So the ones that were right at the back end of the autumn term are currently under review and currently going through the QA process both with Ofsted and with CQC. An update about the 4 areas that have been issued with written statements of action. Part of my slides later on will just walk us through what we mean by a written statement of action and the series of events that follow that issuing of a written statement of action. At the time when Nigel and I presented last term, we'd only issued 1 of those 4, so obviously we've had 3 more during that window of the autumn term last year. And just headlines, I'm sure you've been following where we've been inspecting since we launched in May. That's the overall view of those 20 inspections in the local areas that we've actually been to. And you'll see there in terms of size, some of those have got multiple CCGs, some of those local areas have 1 CCG. So that right across the country you can see there the range. And they also span what we call our 8 Ofsted regions. So we're always making sure that the rollout over the 5-year window takes account of that. So we're looking at the picture across those 8 regions. So in terms of inspection practice, just some headlines from me, but also I'd quite like to take this opportunity to do a little bit of myth busting. As always with any inspection framework, the myths start to generate, and if you've seen my National Director Sean Harford on Twitter and on numerous YouTube videos, we're very keen to share and bust some of those myths as we go along on a new inspection framework. Particularly the second bullet point here, I think is really important, that when CQC and HMI and OI join together to do their inspection preparation, they look at a range of evidence that informs what we call key lines of inquiry. So across the framework, across education, care and health, what are our key lines of inquiry that we want to take into that local area and really start to unpack and gather evidence about and triangulate evidence about, that then feed in all of those meetings and visits that we make across the week. And that's a really important principle. So CQC and Ofsted will start from those hypotheses, and that's what we start to test. Clearly, things come up along the journey, and that's the case in any inspection. Things change direction, new evidence comes to light, new questions come to light, but that's the starting point. I want to mention the notification of 5 days. Way back in the consultation, we had a very strong view that it was important that areas did have the 5-day notification period, and we recognise that's really important to get parents and carers, children and young people to be part of the inspection. Now, this is a bit of a plea really from Nigel and myself. We are really keen to further develop how we can engage at the point of notification with parents and carers. We're listening to your feedback, and many of you in this room might have fed back after inspection or to your local areas. How can we help you to ensure that right from the point of notification, right to the end of the Friday of the inspection, we really do canvass the views of parents, carers and children and young people. We're developing new ideas all the time. We have a new engagement strategy team that are looking at this, but we recognise that sometimes you say, well, actually we didn't know about this inspection. Well, we want to know why you didn't know about this inspection, because there is a requirement on the local areas to actually try and publicise that inspection to gather your views. So certainly if you want to write to myself or Nigel or work with colleagues at the DFE, that's a really important next step. And that was something you asked us to focus on. What are some of the things that we're thinking about on inspection practice? Well, that's one of them. That's one of the things we want to move forward. That also links to the later bullet point there about meetings with groups of parents and carers, both on school visits or on visits to settings, but also in the face-to-face meeting that the inspection team do. Those two things absolutely line up. And also, in terms of the key points here, a range of evidence. We've heard quite a lot this morning about how health is really working with the DFE to really look at what kind of information can the health sector support so that all partners in the inspection process have access to evidence that can be shared and talked about with the inspection team. And I think the momentum has changed. There's definitely a new momentum, and that's a really positive step forward for inspection. Underpinning some of my slides are also about the impact of local areas, leaders, managers, really understanding where you are at in evidencing your work against the code. So actually, how well do you know the impact of your actions on outcomes for children and young people in your local area? And that's a key inspection question. So from strategic joint commissioning all across those different partners, how are you evaluating your work in order that you know the impact? And that underpins all of the meetings that we have with you. Clearly, we always try to make sure we visit a range of settings, and I think that's where there's been a little bit of a myth about why CQC might go to a particular setting when the HMI goes to a different setting. But that's just because in terms of expertise and gathering of evidence, that's how we need to plan the week in order to visit a whole range of settings across education, care and also health. We are required in statute to report on any safeguarding concerns that we find, so as we've said before, that's really important. We'll raise any issues with you as we go along through the inspection journey. The fieldwork, obviously discussions with elected members and a whole range of partners. And in some local areas, we've had to maybe remodel the meetings to have less personnel there. That's absolutely fine. It's just because we want to talk to absolutely the right people on the agenda for that particular meeting. So if we ask you to stand down people, it's just so that we can really get the views of the people in the meeting against the key line of inquiry. We might need to meet different people as we go along the week that we may have not planned in. So helping us to be flexible, and you've been really good at that. Local areas that are here, that's been a real positive, that dialogue between the team and your local area nominated officer to make sure we can meet with the right colleagues as we go through the week. And the last point there, we particularly are pushing forward with the webinars, which I wanted to mention today in particular. For many people, joining a webinar can be a bit of an odd experience. Has anyone joined a webinar in the room? A few show of hands, great. You can feel like you're typing away in the webinar, sharing your views, and no one's really reading it. Well, actually, they are, because all the time we're processing your comments as they come through. So when the lead inspector is running the webinar and you're contributing, the team are sitting in a room with all their screens and are queuing off each other to respond to your feedback. And we store that feedback, so the next day the inspection team will go through all of your comments and all of your feedback, and that becomes part of the evidence base. So all of that is collated. So although you may not be able to get your voice heard on the webinar, you are, but you're doing it by typing or other comms that are part of that webinar. We recognise there's a way to go on that, and we've absolutely heard your feedback on that. And that's my comment earlier about, so how else can we engage with parents and carers? What else can we do to facilitate that? So just a couple of myths here. There we go, you've all gone really dark now. I can see you. Okay, that we inspect separately, that it's not really a joint inspection. Well, no, actually. It is a joint inspection, but you might see us off going to different places and doing different meetings, but we all come back together during the week to have what we call keeping in touch meetings, and that might be with the team, might be with the local area, and they're really important meetings to bring the evidence together. The other myth that we're hearing quite a lot of is parents hand-picked. So actually it's the local area that gives the lead inspector a list and says, these are the parents you're working with, this is who we want you to meet this week. Obviously, we always have to negotiate how many parents and carers we can meet on a setting visit, that's really important. But actually, it's the decisions of the lead inspector working with the colleague from CQC and the Ofsted inspector about who we might want to meet with. And that's also to get coverage of need. So actually, in terms of looking at a range of needs on inspection, that's really a key message there. And this comes later as well. A bit of a question about the reports in relation to the inspection framework. We are gathering the evidence, of course, in the inspection framework and handbook, but you won't always see a comment on everything in the inspection report. So how we stack up that big picture about the effectiveness of the local area in identifying need, meeting need, and improving outcomes. If we were to write a sentence about absolutely everything in the handbook, you'd have a 20-page report letter. So when we were designing the programme, one of the big messages was we want to judge the overall effectiveness and report on the key strengths in these local areas and areas that require development. Now the reason for that is, hopefully that then serves, a bit like your whole conference today, you can take those messages back into the sector. So we can really spotlight, these are strengths in the areas that we've inspected thus far, these are areas of needing development, and then you can also look at those. So that's a really important message I hope you'll take away from today, that you may not see a comment, a paragraph, a sentence on every aspect of the framework, but we're really pulling down what it is they're doing, what local areas are doing well, and those next steps for improvement. On that note, where are we now? So 20 inspections on, some headlines first from myself, and then I'm going to hand over to Nigel. We absolutely recognise that there's an urgency, all right, and most areas, right from the issuing of the code right to now, are really moving forward, recognising that urgency to meet those requirements. Where we see strong practice, and we've reported on this on key strengths, we are seeing cohesive working, we are seeing those leadership teams joining up and planning together and evaluating together. That permeates partnerships in health, education and care. And there is a lens in that on outcomes. a whole range of outcomes, not just academic outcomes, not just how many GCSEs, progress measures, attendance, fixed term exclusions, those kind of outcomes, but actually preparedness to live independently, preparation for adulthood, preparation for transition. So actually understanding what outcomes means and how those partners are really a key in that joining up to meet those outcomes. And particularly in early years, we're finding some quite strong practice in several areas that we've reported on thus far in the early years space. But this ties into what we've heard already about meeting the needs, identifying needs of 16 to 19, 19 to 25 provision. And that's where we're seeing at the moment it's still quite fragmented. So that cohesion, those points of transition across education, care and health, still in that 16 to 25 bracket, we're saying there's some issues there to keep moving forward. Good use of the local offer in some local areas and really enabling parents and carers' voice to shape that local offer. What does that look like? How are they absolutely strategically involved in the decisions around the local offer and formulating and also disseminating the local offer? So working jointly with key partners in the area. We have seen some good quality EHCPs with really strong co-production. And I've heard inspectors talking, Nigel and I and Lee and the team back at CQC and Ofsted. I've really heard where that's working well. There is that real focus on co-production and high quality and a sharp focus on outcomes. What is the impact of this meant to be for those children and young people? We've also reported on some really strong, well-grounded training for SENCOs. So training together, sharing experience, sharing practice. And where you see that then permeating into school settings, you see the better outcomes for both the children and young people, but also for the parents and carers that really understand what is happening in those particular settings. And where leaders are able to talk to us and self-evaluate about their work, a range of evidence sources are being used. So we see those data sets coming together, but we also see elements of self-reflection. Now, Ofsted and CQC do not require a 40-page self-assessment document, but what we do want to see is how well you can talk to us about your own assessment of your work, and that's really key there. Just want to pull out 2 or 3 things on here as you're looking through the key bullets here. The monitoring of outcomes and the frequency and clarity for that has been quite weak in some of those areas where we've said there might be identification of need, there might be assessment of need, but the end point of that process and provision isn't sharply focused on, so what impact is this intended to have? So particularly looking at outcomes, the required transition plan not being in place or being very poorly implemented, and then a lack of cohesion between key agencies. So really not understanding that strategic top-level oversight of how the reforms were being led through the local area. And the local offer in some local areas was poorly disseminated. We have spoken to parents and carers and people have said, what local offer? We don't know where it is. We don't know what it is. So in terms of those local areas moving forward, there's quite a way to go in understanding and taking that through to the next step. Particular groups of children and young people. We've heard a mention this morning of SEN support. In our weaknesses that we've identified across some local areas, the support and impact for SEN support children, that's coming out as a thread at the moment on those weaker aspects. So we're certainly picking that up as an area that local areas really do need to sharpen. Inconsistency is in services, but also a range of lack of understanding of roles and responsibilities. And if that's not secure, then how can you lead your commissioning forward in order that everyone really understands how they play a role in that commissioning and in that evaluation process? We've heard a lot about EHCs this morning, and we have found there's quite a big backlog, but then how is the leadership team in that local area dealing with that backlog within the resources? And we heard the discussion with Stuart this morning. What are you doing? How are you moving that forward? What plans do you have in place in order to clear that backlog? We had a quote, I've just put this in on the last bullet. Parents still feeling that they're let into the process but they're not integral to it. And on occasion the same for children and young people. Outcomes, we've raised a concern about progress of some people groups, particularly in secondary school, in mainstream school, rates of attendance and some high rates of fixed term exclusions. Why is that happening? And a lack of real response, urgency of response to those particular needs and for groups of children and young people, particularly also children looked after. That's coming through as again a bit of a strand there. So there's some headlines there, and I'm just going to hand over to Nigel, and we're just going to pick up some of the key things in the health space, and then I'll talk about the written statement of action.
Thank you, Joanna. Good afternoon. I'm glad Joanna referred to us as the dynamic duo. I thought she was going to say Morecambe Wise for me. I won't go there. I did want to say something before I start, really, that this has been quite a journey for us working with Ofsted. I manage within CQC a number of joint inspections with other inspectorates, HMIC, HMI Probation, HMI Prisons, and another programme with Ofsted. It's not always easy doing joint inspections, and we're doing the same inspection, but we're different inspectorates. We have a different culture, we do things differently, but actually what really works here is that we have the same commitment and the same values and the same aims, and that's really driven this programme together. So I've been really impressed, particularly by the way Joanna's driven this. Joanna's one of those, excuse me, I've got a frog. Joanna's one of those people that has a strategic vision, but also knows the detail. You don't want to get into a discussion with Joanna about detail.
So don't ask any questions.
You'll lose, I'm telling you. Okay. Excuse me, I'm really struggling. I'm just going to give you some very headline comments here about health in sort of three areas. One in terms of identification of need, support and outcomes. I think none of this will be surprising, and Joanna's already picked it up really in some of the early discussions. I think we've certainly seen that the processes for sort of detailed identification and diagnosis are much more variable and dependent upon sort of local area waiting lists and levels of staff expertise. And the sort of systems for comprehensive diagnosis have varied widely. Again, universal specialist level identification in health is much stronger for under 5 population than it is for older young people. I think we've already picked that up, and Elaine's picked that up as well. So there's been less opportunity really in that process where we've seen needs reassessed as needs have changed. So that's been a bit of a feature as we've gone along. And it's certainly an emphasis of needs being identified at an early age and not regularly monitored or updated to reflect progress. And this won't surprise you that where needs are solely health related, the systems are much clearer. Where the needs are health and education related, when you're talking about global developmental delay, for example, then there's a clarity. That wouldn't surprise you. And one of the challenges, I think, for health, social care and education is certainly the complexity of the health environment. So in terms of meeting needs, we've seen that there's been, in relation to post-diagnostic support for specific children, there's a gap, and in some areas there's an emphasis on targeting resources at diagnosis and identification of need rather than supporting the needs of the child and the family once a diagnosis has been made. One of the positive features in quite a lot of areas we've seen is that having a diagnosis is not the sort of golden ticket to access services, and sometimes we see people getting support in some areas. Someone's shaking, the ladies there shaking their head, it doesn't work. This is really a high level pick, it's not happening everywhere, but certainly in some areas that's what we've seen. A contribution from health into EHC plans is inconsistent and not necessarily well understood by partners. That's clear. And in fact, and health teams not always good at defining their contribution to that either. There is a sort of a bit of a focus on quantifying the sort of service being provided rather than focusing on the child and the outcome. And that's been a bit of a feature, but I think in a sense that's some of the sort of historical legacy here. In terms of outcomes, joint commissioning of services in some areas is really underdeveloped. We've not really seen a strong use of a needs analysis to ensure that local areas can track the SEND population and plan proactively. And indeed, in some areas, SEND is not even featured in the joint strategic needs analysis. Use of personal health budgets is limited, and we haven't sort of seen systems that have supported that very well, apart from where you're talking about children and young people with very complex needs. Training for health staff, we picked that up early on this morning, but training for health staff on SEND reforms has been variable, and not all the sort of clinicians are clear as to their roles, responsibilities in relation to the new reforms. And health outcomes remain based on a model of service delivery rather than being part of a person-centred approach. I think that's the sort of key issue here. Joanna, pass back to Joanna. Oh, we've got some more. I apologise for that. Okay, so the Commissioning of Health Services has not yet, well, I'll pick this up earlier again, that the commissioning has not yet caught up with the sort of 0 to 25 agenda. I think in some areas there's new service specifications have been issued, but they've not really been worked through to extended age group without commissioning and additional resources to achieve that. Transition between services, particularly for 19 to 25-year-old population, continue to be a challenge. And Joanna referred to it generally that the true co-production isn't really there in terms of empowering parents and children and young people. So although there's been some positive shifts strategically, the impact has not yet been widely felt. Joanna?
So I think it's really important just to kind of reflect on right across education, care and health. We've got some key strengths coming through, and we've got some areas where over those 20 inspections we can see there's some common themes that are really starting to emerge now. So I just want to link that to that layout and commentary in the report really, because we don't make graded judgments on these local area SEND inspections. What we're trying to do through the report is tell the story of the local area's effectiveness against the 3 key inspection judgments, but also I think we firmly believe, as always, that any inspection should drive improvement. So what can you take from an inspection report, both as a parent, as a young person, as a local area, that can then support you in the next steps of work in that area? And the key thing here that I've referred to earlier is we have issued 4 areas with written statements of action, and that's due to significant concerns. Now, what do we mean by significant concerns? Significant concerns are often endemic. They can permeate several areas of the inspection framework, and often raise a concern about the capacity and impact of leaders in that local area to secure further improvement. In the framework, you'll see that we refer also to significant concerns relating to if we find illegal practice, or if there is endemic weaknesses in meeting the requirements in the code. So at the end of those letters, we do report on what it is that are those significant areas of concern. Now, We have keeping in touch meetings all the way along the week as a team, but also with the local area nominated officer. You've given me your throat. And also then at the final feedback on the Friday. Now, in most instances, the local area should know as we go along the week if we're heading towards the written statement of action. But clearly, on any inspection, evidence is subject to moderation and final review, both by CQC and also by Ofsted. So that's really important about the moderation process of whether we give a significant focus to areas of concern that then we deem as a written statement of action is necessary. There may be follow-up activity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is and could be as we go forward. But what's the process? Well, the local areas, your local areas are required to submit a written statement of action, and it's within 70 working days to Ofsted. So we receive it, and then we will turn that around working with our colleagues at CQC. We do this jointly to review the written statement of action, and we determine whether it's fit for purpose or not. Now, as part of that process, the local area is still required to publish the written statement of action so that children, young people, parents and carers are all aware of what it is that is ongoing as part of that process. But fitness for purpose means what? Well, actually, does a written statement of action indicate how leaders and key partners will actually take on board those 3 or 4 significant areas of weakness and set in place a series of events, changes, timescales, outcome points where they can drive that improvement forward. So when we talk about fit for purpose, does it actually tackle those things that have triggered that written statement of action? And that means tackling things quickly. The impact might be longer, but actually what do you put in place in order that you can tackle those areas that are requiring significant concern to be moved forward quickly? You can see there the time scale of that. We turn it around within 10 working days. If we deem that it's not fit for purpose, local areas can have a second bite at the cherry. So you can resubmit your written statement of action for further review. Now, I know Stuart and Gareth and all the advisory team at DFE are working with those areas to support that process, so that those written statements of action, when they come in, are not possibly 20 chapters long, but are really concise and focused on the key things that the local area needs to do to secure improvement. Once it goes through the second stage of review by CQC and Ofsted, if we still then deem it is not fit for purpose, that can trigger further action, and we are required to report to DFE and also report to the Minister. Now, as I said earlier, because these aren't a cycle of inspections, basically we have no power at the moment to come in and re-inspect. That has to be at the commission of the Minister and the department. So it may lead to further activity of a nature. We don't know what that might be, what it could be. We have to talk to the Minister and DFE about that. But it might be that we go back in again, we do further inspection activity, or advisors decide on next steps with the Minister for those areas that maybe don't get through that process at a second stage with the written statement of action. So that's how it works. We've had quite a lot of questions come in since we first issued the first couple in the autumn term. And I'm also about to put some information on the Ofsted and CQC website about the process. There is an annex at the back of the handbook that takes you through that in sequence, but we'll also issue just that, probably this slide and a couple of other slides, so that everyone's really clear about how that process happens. Overall, we've captured feedback from every inspection. We've canvassed parents, children about their views, and we've canvassed local areas and nominated officers about how you found the inspection process. And on the whole, it's been positive. If anything, sharpening the focus, sharpening the practice, well, that's what inspection's always about. And at the end of the day, That's why we've developed the framework in the first place, to really, really sharpen practice. But actually the ongoing discussion has been really valuable, and both for inspectors and also for colleagues in local areas to work together as you go through the week, just like we do under inspection frameworks, to hear views, to triangulate evidence, to listen to one another, and work our way through how the evidence stacks up by the end of the week. So we're 20 inspections on. We did commit that halfway through the 5-year cycle we would do a formal review, and that still stands. So once we're about 2.5 years in, we'll take stock, we'll do a formal review, and we will report back to the Minister at that stage as well. But that's just giving you some of the big headlines that I hope you'll also take into some of the workshop sessions this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you.